Juror number 7. That's you. You're sitting in a wooden chair in the jury box of a county courthouse in a mid-sized American city, and you are, by every legal and procedural measure that exists, exactly where you're supposed to be. You went through voir dire. You answered the questions honestly, or honestly enough. You said you had no prior knowledge of the case. You said you could be impartial. You raised your right hand, and you swore an oath, and the judge thanked you for your service, and here you are. Juror number 7. The defendant's name is Marcus Webb. He's 34 years old. He's sitting at the defense table in a suit that's slightly too big, borrowed probably, or bought recently for the occasion, by someone who loves him and wanted him to look respectable. He has the specific stillness of someone who has been told by his lawyer to sit still and look calm, and is working very hard at both. He looks terrified, which is reasonable. He's charged with second-degree murder. He didn't do it. You know this with a certainty that requires no deliberation, no weighing of evidence, no careful consideration of the prosecution's case versus the defense's case. You know it because you were there. Because you're the reason Marcus Webb is sitting at that table in that borrowed suit with that expression on his face. And you are sitting 11 feet away in juror seat number 7, watching. Let's go back to the beginning. Her name was Claire Ashworth. You need to say that first, before anything else. Because the easiest thing in the world, the thing your mind has been doing since that night, the thing that makes the rest of this survivable, is to let her become a function of the story rather than a person. The victim, the deceased, the body, the evidence. Her name was Claire Ashworth. She was 31 years old. She taught elementary school. She had a laugh that arrived before the joke did, this anticipatory brightness that the people who loved her found irresistible. She had a sister in Portland, and parents who are still alive and are sitting in the third row of the gallery right now, and you have not looked at them directly since the first day of the trial, and you will not. You knew Claire for 8 months. You met through mutual friends at a birthday party where you talked for 3 hours and exchanged numbers, and then talked for 3 more hours on the phone 2 days later. You were together for 6 months before it ended. Not dramatically. It ended the way many relationships end, in a gradual withdrawal that was honest enough to be confusing and incomplete enough to leave the door not quite closed. She ended it. That's the part that matters for this story. Not cruelly, not with someone else involved, or not that you could prove, just with a clarity that she had and you didn't, a certainty that what you had wasn't what either of you needed. Delivered with the kindness that made you love her in the first place, and that made the kindness somehow worse. You handled it badly, not in any way that showed, not in any way that anyone saw. Internally, in the private space where you held the feelings you've never been good at processing, they fermented into something that you told yourself was just grief, and that you were managing, and that would pass. It didn't pass. You started driving past her apartment. Not often, not in a way that you framed to yourself as what it was, just in her neighborhood. Occasionally for reasons that required less and less justification as the weeks went on. You saw her once, from a distance, with someone. Not definitive, a friend maybe, or a coworker. But your brain built a story around it and lived in that story until the story became true enough to act on. The night it happened, you've been drinking. Not drunk. That's important to you somehow, that you weren't drunk, though you understand that this distinction carries no moral weight. You drove to her building. You buzzed her apartment. she let you up, which you taken as something it wasn't, the way you've been taking things as something they weren't for months. The argument lasted 20 minutes. The details of those 20 minutes are something you will carry in their completeness for the rest of your life. Every word, every expression on her face as she moved through confusion to frustration to something that looked at the end like fear. And that look on her face is the one that visits you at 3 a.m. The one that no amount of functional daytime living manages to fully suppress. You didn't plan it. You need to believe that. You do believe it. The not planning feels like the last thing standing between who you are and who you can't be. You left the way you came in. Nobody saw you. You were careful afterward, not in a premeditated way, in the instinctive way of someone whose brain has shifted into a register where self-preservation operates independently of conscious thought. You drove home. You sat in your car in your parking garage for a long time. Then you went upstairs and washed your hands and went to bed. You followed the investigation the way you'd follow a story about a stranger. That was the first skill you discovered you had. The ability to compartmentalize so completely that the news reports about Claire's death produced in you something that looked and felt from the inside like genuine grief. Because it was genuine grief. That's the part that confounds you when you allow yourself to examine it honestly. You grieved her. Fully in the way you'd have grieved her if you'd had nothing to do with it. The mind is capable of extraordinary compartmentalization when the alternative is a kind of self-knowledge that it cannot survive. The investigation produced a suspect 6 weeks later. Marcus Webb had been in Claire's building that night. You know this because the news report said a neighbor saw an argument in the hallway and Marcus had been there earlier in the evening. He and Claire had their own history, a brief relationship 2 years prior that ended amicably by all accounts. He'd come by apparently to return something of hers he'd found while moving apartments. They'd spoken briefly in the hallway. He'd left, but he'd been there. And the neighbor's statement, combined with the prior relationship, combined with a piece of forensic evidence you don't entirely understand, some transfer of material that the prosecutor is describing with more certainty than the defense seems to think is warranted, combined to point at Marcus Webb with enough force to result in an arrest. You watched the news report about his arrest and felt something you've been trying to classify ever since. Not relief. You won't call it relief. More like the specific vertigo of watching a structure that should collapse remain standing. The narrative of the investigation settling around a shape that isn't true, becoming stable, becoming official. You told yourself you would come forward. In the first weeks, you told yourself this with a sincerity that felt real. You constructed the internal scenario, walking into a police station, asking to speak to the lead detective, saying the words. You ran that scenario many times. Then the weeks became a month, and the month became 2, and Marcus Webb was indicted, and the trial date was set, and the scenario of coming forward became, each time you ran it, less like a choice and more like a theoretical. And then you got the jury summons. You should have recused yourself. There were mechanisms for it. Clean, discreet, requiring no explanation that would raise flags. You could have indicated familiarity with the case. You could have indicated a hardship. You could have said something during voir dire that would have resulted in a dismissal without cause before it became your problem to manage. You didn't. You've spent significant time examining why. The honest answer, the one that survives the most rigorous self-interrogation you're capable of, is this. You wanted to see it. Not from a sadistic place. You don't think so, you hope not. From a place of compulsion. The need to be proximate to the thing. To sit in the room where what you did is being examined and measured and adjudicated. To be inside the machinery of consequence. Or maybe, and this is the interpretation you find most difficult to sit with, maybe you were already thinking about what being on the jury meant for the outcome. Maybe the compartmentalized part of your mind that operates in pure self-preservation was several steps ahead of the part that was still telling itself stories about coming forward. You don't know. You genuinely don't know which of those things is true. You sat through voir dire. You answered every question with the care of someone who understands exactly what they're doing and exactly what they're risking. The prosecution's attorney asked if you had any prior relationship with the victim, the defendant, or any witnesses. You said no. The defense attorney asked if you could evaluate the evidence impartially. You said yes. Both of those answers were technically true in ways that required a very specific definition of technically. The judge thanked you for your service. You took your seat. Juror number 7. The prosecution's case is stronger than you expected and weaker than you feared. The forensic evidence, the transfer material that featured prominently in the arrest, is being presented with qualifications that the prosecutor is visibly uncomfortable with. An expert witness spends 2 hours explaining why the evidence is significant, and another hour under cross-examination explaining its limitations. The jury is following this with the specific attentiveness of people who've been told something is complicated and are trying to decide how complicated. You understand the evidence better than anyone else in the jury box. Not forensically, but you know what happened in that apartment, which means you know what the evidence should and shouldn't show. And watching it being interpreted through the framework of Marcus Webb's guilt is like watching someone solve a puzzle with the wrong picture on the box. The neighbor who saw the hallway argument testifies. She's 68, straightforward, clearly telling what she believes to be the truth. She saw Marcus Webb in the hallway with Claire at approximately 8 p.m. They were talking. The tone was elevated, but not, she says, frightening. He left at approximately 8:15 p.m. You arrived at 10:40 p.m. There's a 2.5-hour gap in the prosecution's timeline that they're bridging with circumstantial reasoning. You sit in seat number 7 and watch them build that bridge, and you know exactly what's on the other side of it, and you say nothing. Marcus Webb's attorney is good. Not brilliant, but competent, thorough, and clearly working very hard for his client in the way that public defenders work hard when they believe in their client's innocence, which this one clearly does. She hammers the forensic limitations. She produces witnesses who account for Marcus Webb's whereabouts after 8:15 p.m. in ways that aren't airtight but are meaningful. She establishes his character through people who know him, former colleagues, a pastor, a woman who runs the community garden where Marcus volunteers on Saturday mornings, a man who volunteers at a community garden on Saturday mornings. You look at Marcus Webb at the defense table, and for the first time in this process, you don't look away quickly. You look at him long enough to see him as a person. It's the worst thing you've done since the night itself. You're unraveling, slowly and invisibly. Nothing that shows in the jury room during breaks. Nothing in your face during testimony that the attorneys would read as significant. But internally, the structure you've built is developing fractures that the vibration of this proceeding is making worse every day. The defense calls a witness you didn't expect. A woman named Patricia Okafor. She was Claire's closest friend. She testifies about Claire's state of mind in the weeks before her death. Her relationship with Marcus, which had been, Patricia says, genuinely friendly by the end. No tension, No unresolved conflict. Nothing that Marcus Webb had any motive to resolve violently. Then the defense attorney asks about other people in Claire's life, about whether anyone had shown unwanted attention or intensity in the period before her death. Patricia pauses. She mentions a prior relationship. She doesn't name you. She describes a situation. An ex who had difficulty accepting the end of things, who Patricia had expressed concern about to Claire, who Claire had described as being in a bad place emotionally. The defense attorney doesn't have your name, doesn't have enough to connect the description to a specific person. It's not exculpatory evidence in itself. It's a suggestion, a direction, something a more resourced investigation might have followed further and didn't. But juror number 4 is looking at you. Not suspiciously. You don't think suspiciously. Just the way people look at someone when something in the room has shifted and they're checking the faces around them. But she's looking at you, and you hold her gaze for exactly the right amount of time, neutral and unrevealing, and then you both look back at the witness stand. Your heart is doing something that has no good description. The jury gets the case on a Thursday afternoon, 11 people, and you file into the deliberation room. The foreperson is a retired engineer named Harold, who approaches the task with the systematic thoroughness of his profession. He proposes going through each charge, each piece of evidence, methodically. Everyone agrees. You agree. Your voice is normal. Your hands on the table are still. The first vote is 8 to convict, 3 to acquit. You voted to acquit. Not from conscience, or not only from conscience, from the terrifying practical reality that a conviction requires unanimity, and a hung jury is the worst outcome for Marcus Webb. An acquittal requires either unanimity or enough people to bring everyone to reasonable doubt. You are one person. You need to move people. The deliberations last 2 full days. You are the most effective voice for reasonable doubt in the room. You know the evidence better than anyone. You know exactly where the gaps are, where the prosecution's bridge is weakest, where the logic requires assumptions that the evidence doesn't actually support. You argue with the precision of someone who has been living inside this case for weeks, which you have been in a way that none of your fellow jurors can fully understand. Harold is the most resistant. He's a systematic thinker, and the prosecution's systematic presentation has organized itself in his mind into a structure he trusts. You work on him carefully, methodically, not arguing against him, but asking questions that make him do the work of dismantling his own certainty. By the end of the second day, Harold is at reasonable doubt. The final vote is 12 to acquit. Marcus Webb is found not guilty. You watch him in the hallway outside the courtroom. His family surrounds him, his mother is crying, his attorney is shaking his hand with the specific relief of someone who fought hard for something they weren't sure they'd win. Marcus Webb stands in the middle of it all with an expression that will stay with you. Not joy, exactly. Something more complicated. The specific face of someone who has been inside a machine that could have destroyed them and has come out the other side and is still processing what just happened to them. He didn't know what almost happened to him. He almost died in prison for something you did. He might still be processing the damage, the months of his life consumed, the legal costs, the professional consequences of an arrest and trial, even with an acquittal. The thing that will always appear in a background check and require explanation. An acquittal is not innocence in the court of other people's assumptions. You did that to him. You walk out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight, and you stand on the steps for a moment and you think about what comes next. There are two versions of the rest of your life. In one version, you walk back into that courthouse or to a police station or to a lawyer's office and you say the words. You accept what follows. You do not know precisely what follows legally, whether the double jeopardy protections that now shield Marcus Webb create, any complexity in how the state pursues you, whether your conduct during voir dire and deliberations creates additional charges beyond the original crime, whether any of the choices you've made since that night have been choices that the legal system will treat with any mercy. You don't know. You know it would be very bad. You know it would be the end of the life you've been living. In the other version, you walk down these steps and you get in your car and you drive home and you live with it. You've been living with it for 3 months already. You're good at it in the terrible way that people become good at things they practice constantly. The machinery of functional life, work, routine, the ordinary performance of normalcy has not broken down. You've been surprised by that. You expected some visible deterioration, and there hasn't been one. Maybe there won't be. Maybe you're the kind of person who can do this indefinitely. That possibility is the most frightening thing you've encountered in all of this. More frightening than the voir dire. More frightening than Patricia Okafor's testimony. More frightening than juror number 4's brief, neutral glance. The possibility that this is something you can live with. Is that who you are? You stand on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sun. You watch Marcus Webb's family walk to their car. You think about Claire Ashworth's laugh. The way it arrived before the joke. The way her parents are driving somewhere right now with an acquittal. That means no one is ever going to be held responsible for what happened to their daughter. You think about that. You stand there for a long time. So what does it look like to be a juror who knows the defendant is innocent? Because you're the one who did it. It looks like this. An ordinary person in an ordinary chair, performing the function of justice while being the reason justice is necessary. It looks like the machinery of the law working exactly as it's designed to work. Evidence evaluated, rights protected, reasonable doubt respected, and producing a result that is legally correct and morally catastrophic simultaneously. It looks like the gap between guilt and culpability, between what can be proven and what is true, between the person other people see and the person that exists in the private space behind your eyes. The courtroom is built on the assumption that jurors are outside the crime, that the people evaluating what happened are separate from what happened, that the wall between observer and participant is solid. That wall is only as solid as the person standing next to it. What would you have done in that jury room? And the harder question, the one that has no comfortable answer, what would you have done on those courthouse steps? Could you have lived with it? Or is the real question whether you already are?